approved the draft organic law for the defense of the Guayana Esequiba during the second discussion. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva presented on Thursday the Live Black Youth Plan, which seeks to support the country's black youth and address the social injustices faced by this sector. And in Sudan, around 200,000 children could die of malnutrition due to the war that started last year, according to estimations. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from teleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, the National Assembly approved the draft organic law for the defense of the Guayana Esequiba during the second discussion. During the session, the deputies highlighted the content of the legal document that claims the sovereign defense of the Venezuelan territory. During his presentation, Deputy Diosdado Cabello explained the journey that involved the territorial defense and the controversy with the arbitration award and a popular consultation. Cabello emphasized that the approval of the defense law by Guayana Esequiba complies with the mandate dictated by the people last December 8th in a consultative referendum.
We declare approved the organic law for the defense of the Guayana Esequiba. It is submitted to the Constitutional Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice so that it should rule on the constitutionality of its organic nature in accordance with the provision of Article 203 of the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We kept our promise with the people of Venezuela, who came out massively to say yes 5 times on December 3rd, 2023. We kept our promise with the Venezuelan people.
On the other hand, the National Assembly Deputy Diosdado Cabello ratified the sovereign spirit of the law for the territorial defense of the Guayana Esequiba.
As of January 9, the approval of the first articles began. It was a very broad consultation throughout the national territory. All states of Venezuela participated for a total of more than 200 consultations throughout the country. Opinions, observations, and recommendations were gathered from the different sectors, a law that I believe complies perfectly with the spirit approved by the sovereign people in the referendum on the issue of the Guayana Esequiba, which I would like to remind you had 5 questions.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bolivia will implement restrictions of movements and business activities as the 2024 population and household census will take place on March 23rd. The closure of the borders will begin at midnight on March 22nd and will extend until midnight on March 23rd. Several actions are announced for these days. Among them, there is the international and interdepartmental surface transport restriction and alcohol consumption prohibition. The population and housing census already began with the registration of police and military forces. The census is considered of vital importance for the plurinational government of Bolivia, providing crucial data for public policy planning and development of the country. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva presented on Thursday the Live Black Youth Plan, which seeks to support the country's black youth and address the social injustices faced by this sector. From Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemos with more.
Greetings. Today, President Lula da Silva launched in Brazil the Living Black Youth Plan, an initiative of the Ministry of Racial Equality, headed by Aniel Franco, who is the sister of the councilwoman murdered in Rio de Janeiro, Mariel Franco, and who has carried out the task of listening to about 6,000 young blacks to find out what are the proposals, the concerns, the suffering of this sector of the population. An important fact is that the majority of the Brazilian population is black, and the number of homicides against black youth is 4 times higher than the number of homicides against white youths. In this sense, President Lula da Silva, during his presentation in Brasilia, assured that he seeks to confront the social injustice experienced by this sector of the Brazilian population. He went through all the aspects in which this extermination of the black population is manifested, both in terms of social vulnerability as well as the actions of the military police in several states that target first the black population and also the stray bullets, those bullets from police conflicts that usually end up in the bodies of black youths in Brazil. Also the prison issue, where most of the prisoners are black and many times innocent, but are taken to jail only because of their skin color. In this sense, this plan is being developed, which foresees the use of $120 million in initiatives to address social vulnerability and also to provide more rights to equalize an unjust and unfair situation that has existed for centuries here in Brazil. It is also foreseen that there will be an interministerial action. It is requested that all Brazilian ministries focus on this program, which is a state policy for the government of Lula da Silva, taking into account the historical inequality that the young black population lives in Brazil.
And from Cuba, the ex-account of the Presidency of the Republic announced the creation of a new space for communication, which will be hosted by President Miguel Díaz-Canel to address the country's news and issues. From the Presidency is the name given to the YouTube channel, and in its first episode, the head of state commented on the events of last Sunday, March 17th, when citizens from some localities of the country took to the streets to protest against the long blackouts and delays in the delivery of the standard family basket. Far right-wing news media and U.S. politicians took advantage of these events to motivate a social outbreak on the island. Alongside the Minister of Energy, Vicente de la O Levy, Díaz-Canel analyzed the current energy situation in the country and the prospects for a short and medium-term solution. The Cuban leader, in his first program on the digital platform YouTube, reiterated that his government involves the Cuban people in every decision taken.
The decisions that are taken in Cuba are made considering the opinion of the population, the analysis of the population. The most complex processes in our country are submitted to popular debate. Right now, we are starting with the priorities that we have set for this year. We are in 4 discussion processes that began with the party militancy and that are going to include the population and the communities on the importance of strengthening unity based on the statements and the call by the General of the Army in his speech for the 65th anniversary of the triumph of the revolution in Santiago de Cuba, on the economic measures announced by Prime Minister Marrero at the National Assembly of the People's Power, and which have already begun to be applied with other methodology we have proposed, with other philosophy, when the conditions are created, when the compensation measures are in place for those who may be most affected.
The Cuban president also stressed that behind the alleged demonstrations of March 17th, there is an orchestrated operation from the United States that seeks to destabilize order in the nation.
We're not naive. Here there was also an operation of unconventional warfare, and they applied the same script they always apply, and the script was predetermined. They focus on peaceful demonstrations. After the peaceful demonstration, they begin to talk about police repression, about political prisoners. After the political prisoners, they begin to say that there is ungovernability and that it is a failed state. And after that, they begin to talk about a change of government. All a falsehood, a whole setup, a whole conspiracy that responds to the manuals of unconventional warfare.
On the other hand, Díaz-Canel assured that only a socialist system such as the one that exists in Cuba has the commitment to solve the problems of the people.
The enemy wants to see us in confrontation. The enemy is not interested in solving Cuba's problems. If the enemy were to intervene in Cuba and take over Cuba, which they could never do, and we know why, and that's Maceo's phrase, they would not solve the problems of electricity, nor would they solve food problems, because the logic of capital does not solve these types of problems.
Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. On Thursday in Palestine, dozens of Palestinians were killed and injured by the Israeli occupation troops, mostly women and children. Precisely for the fourth consecutive day, the occupying forces carried out a fierce operation in the Al-Rimal neighborhood and inside the Al-Shifa medical complex. In this sense, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed his concern for the severe situation and reiterated that attacking hospitals is a war crime. In the meantime, health authorities confirmed more than 100 Palestinian victims among the total number of dead and wounded. In the meantime, Herzi Halevi, chief of the General Staff of Israel, admitted the operation carried out in Al-Shifa hospital complex. In this regard, he explained that the aim was to put pressure on Hamas, despite Gazans denounced a fierce bombardment on civil population within the health facility just in the middle of the holy month of Ramadan. In turn, the Zionist military avoided mentioning civilian casualties, citing only that 50 Hamas members died during the attack. It should be noted that in November, Israel and the U.S. claimed to have evidence that the hospital was under Hamas command, but they never proved it. According to official sources, the latest death toll stands at 32,360 Palestinians since the Zionist attacks began on October 7th. In this regard, the occupation army killed more than 13,000 children and 8,400 women, while wounded more than 74,096 people. On the other hand, the World Health Organization noted that about 360,000 residential units have been destroyed or damaged, in addition to 392 educational facilities, and only 12 of 35 hospitals are partially functioning. It must be noted that statistics say that on average, every hour in Gaza, 15 people are killed and 6 of them are children. 35 people are wounded, 42 bombs are dropped, and 12 buildings are destroyed. The head of the U.S. diplomacy, Antony Blinken, is in Saudi Arabia, and from there he announced on Thursday that his country submitted a draft resolution for an immediate ceasefire linked to the release of hostages to the United Nations Security Council. From Qatar, where he began his Middle East tour, he landed in Riyadh. There he met the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is also Prime Minister, and his Minister of Foreign Affairs Faisal bin Farhan. Along the way, the Secretary of State of the U.S. expressed optimism about the approaching ceasefire. The proposal must be put to a vote, assured the head of diplomacy at a press conference. This is the fourth one Washington has produced because of all the previous ones were rejected. On Thursday, authorities in Israel announced that the port of Eilat is on the verge of closing, as they also stated the dismissal of half of its workers, claiming that attacks by Yemeni rebel forces have left them near to shutting down operations. The announcement of the possible closure of one of the most important Israeli ports in northern Israel comes despite cooperation with Western forces seeking to confront the Houthi attacks. It is worth noting that Eilat is at the northern end of the Red Sea and has been one of the most affected by attacks by Yemeni forces in support of the Palestinian cause and against the Israeli genocide in Gaza. In Iran, President Ebrahim Raisi celebrates the Persian New Year, assuring that the economy of the country will advance and be prosperous. The head of state assured that it would be a year of economic prosperity and improvements in the population well-being. Raisi later on shared numbers about the economic development of the country.
For 3 consecutive years, the country has seen growth of more than 4%, while average economic growth in the last decade was less than 1%. Some have claimed that three-digit inflation is looming, but statistics indicate that inflation from 1 point to 1 point where inflation reaches 35% from about 55%, overall inflation will be around 40%.
International Day of Forest is celebrated on March 21st, a day dedicated to raising awareness upon the importance of protecting these invaluable natural resources. This day was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in 2012 as part of a global commitment to the sustainable management, conservation and development of all types of forest to ensure their survival. The choice of marking March 21st as World Forest Day coincides with the vernal equinox in the northern hemisphere and the autumn equinox in the southern hemisphere, symbolizing natural change, rebirth and renewal. Every March 21st is a Global Awareness Day of Down syndrome, which has been officially observed by the United Nations since 2012. Down syndrome exists in all regions of the world, is caused by extra genetic material on chromosome 21, and has varying effects on learning styles, physical characteristics, or health adequate. Adequate access to healthcare, early intervention programs, and inclusive education, as well as appropriate research, are essential for the growth and development of the individual. For World Down Syndrome Day 2024, we call for people around the world to end the stereotypes. We have a final short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. Constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with teleSUR. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Sudan, around 200,000 children could die of malnutrition in the upcoming weeks due to the war that started last year, according to estimations. The country, which has already experienced the largest internal displacement crisis in the world, with 6.5 million people on pilgrimage within the territory, is experiencing a situation of acute food insecurity. The war that began almost a year ago between the current government and the head of the paramilitary forces has left thousands dead and wounded and 18 million people facing severe food insecurity. Edem Wosornu, Director of Operations for the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs, told the Security Council that a situation was a nightmare. Attorney Barry Pollack, who belonged to the legal team representing WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, said Wednesday that his legal team sees no sign of resolving U.S. charges against Assange following the publication of a Wall Street Journal report on exploring a guilty plea. The journal reported that the U.S. Justice Department is considering whether to allow Assange to plead guilty to a reduced charge of mishandling classified information. A Justice Department spokesman declined to comment on the report. The Wall Street Journal said that in recent months, Justice Department officials and Assange's legal team have had preliminary talks about a plea deal, but that the discussions remain uncertain and the talks could fall apart. Assange is fighting extradition from Britain to the U.S. In Portugal, President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa confirmed Luis Montenegro as Prime Minister. The announcement is the result of the round of hearings with political parties and coalitions that presented to the elections. Also strengthening the decision, the recognition of Pedro Nuno, leader of the Socialist Party, that he will be the head of the opposition, as confirmed by the presidential office. The president received hours earlier the right and center-right coalitions that supported the candidacy of Luis Montenegro, who have presented a sketch of the composition of the government. And now we move to the world of sports. In Guatemala, the long-distance running athlete Luis Grijalva returned to this country after 23 years in the United States to apply to compete in Paris with the blue and white colors that represent the Central American nation. In this sense, the runner arrived in the country accompanied by his parents to complete the procedure that will grant him a permit to participate with the colors of his nation of origin in the Olympic Games of Paris 2024, where he has already qualified. Grijalva is considered one of Guatemala's best athletes in history and will compete in the 5,000-meter race. Luis Miguel Grijalva's family emigrated to the United States from Guatemala in 2000 when he was 1 year old. Before participating as a professional in international events, he achieved prestigious awards such as California State Champions in high school and secured multiple All-American finals in Arizona State University. Grijalva, as a professional wearing the Guatemalan uniforms, running the 500 meters competition, achieved a 12th place in the 2021 Olympic Games and 4th place in the 2022 and 2023 World Track and Field Championships. It is worth noting this athlete has a U.S. migrant status that requires special permits for travel outside that nation because DACA recipients are at risk of being denied re-entry. Before finishing, we would like to highlight that today is the World Poetry Day, which commemorates one of humanity's most precious forms of linguistic expression and identity. Poetry, practiced in all cultures and regions of the world, tell us of love, romance, heroism, our common nature and shared values. UNESCO's first proclaimed March 21st as World Poetry Day at its 30th General Conference in Paris, 1999, to support linguistic diversity through poetic expression and promote the visibility of endangered languages. We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.